Feel free to check out my TeePublic after the video. The Heisei era of Godzilla movies showcase some of the weakest executions the franchise has seen. Emphasis on the word some, not all, meaning that the Heisei era isn't all bad. In fact, it honestly shows some of the best things about the Godzilla series as well, which can all be seen in 1984's Godzilla, more commonly known as The Return of Godzilla, directed by Koji Hashimoto. Plans to bring back Godzilla can be traced all the way back to the late 70s, with several drafts including those featuring Godzilla fighting another giant robot, and some introducing a new monster by the name Bakken, who would eventually become Bagan and would wound up as the final boss in a video game. And the final product would become what I would say is perhaps the best Godzilla movie since the original. Our main character is a reporter named Goromaki, played by Ken Tanaka, who comes across a fishing vessel that was attacked and finds the only survivor, Hiroshi, played by Shin Takuma. And it turns out that 30 years after the first Godzilla attack on Tokyo, another Godzilla had appeared. This new Godzilla eventually attacks a Russian nuclear submarine in Japanese waters, which brings the Cold War into the film, as the Americans and Soviets try to pressure the Japanese Prime Minister, played by Keiju Kobayashi, into using nuclear weapons against Godzilla, which the nation had already agreed to no longer possess after the Second World War. One of the greatest things about The Return of Godzilla is all the tension that occurs, whether it be the Prime Minister's internal struggle, the challenges Goro, Hiroshi, and Naoko face when trying to escape Godzilla's devastating rampage, or just the presence of Godzilla. The scene at the power plant always gives me chills. You may not notice at first, but the film actually uses stock footage from The Last War and Prophecies of Nostradamus. Teruyoshi Nakano returns to direct the special effects, with Shinji Higuchi as special effects assistant, and my god, the special effects are fantastic. The fact that some of the miniatures are larger than Godzilla really gives a sense of scale, and they can look downright apocalyptic and depressing at times. Aside from a few shots where it's obvious that they changed to a giant animatron, Godzilla looks very menacing, and the design they went with is impressive. I also really like how you start to understand Godzilla more as a creature who's just lost in our time, and you definitely get a sense of that as he wanders through Japan, especially during the ending, which is very emotional and you really feel for Godzilla. Other than that, the characters have great performances, the story is a very nice update of the original Godzilla story, and it's just a beautiful film overall. This is my go-to Godzilla movie. Although the American version, Godzilla 1985, made a pretty smart choice by having Raymond Burr reprise his role as Steve Martin from the Americanization of the original Godzilla to maintain continuity, but whose idea was it to plaster Dr. Pepper all over the place? Now moving on to the next film, Godzilla vs. Biollante, directed by Kazuki Omori, which I find to be a bit underrated. You don't really see a lot of people talk about this one, and it's a shame because this one is also very good. It picks up immediately after the events of Return of Godzilla, where samples of Godzilla's DNA are being packed up, but is eventually stolen by a Suradian agent played by Manjot Betty. In Suradia, there's a geneticist named Genshiro Shiragami, played by Koji Takahashi, whose daughter is killed in a terrorist attack, and seeks to keep her alive by merging her DNA with that of a rose and Godzilla's cells, resulting in the monster Biollante. Meanwhile, Godzilla is resting in Mount Mihara until he is set free from explosives that cause the volcano to erupt. As strange and outlandish the premise may be, it really feels like an expansion to its predecessor, as you see how the events from that film affected Japan and other nations. That and we're also introduced to some great characters like Toru Minegishi's character Goro Gondo. This is also the first time we're introduced to Miki, played by Megumi Odaka, who appears throughout the rest of the Heisei series. As for the special effects, they're definitely an improvement over the ones in Return of Godzilla, maybe aside from the water suit, but the miniatures again look very stunning, maintaining the great sense of scale. The TitanGoji suit looks great and would serve as the basis of future Heisei suits. And my god, Biollante. I don't even know where to begin because everything about her is just marvelous. Her design, the way she moves and interacts with her environment, her character as a whole, and everything about it is enough to make her the best monster in the Heisei series. Koichi Kawakita did an excellent job with the special effects, which made for some outstanding action sequences as well. But it's also important to note that Godzilla vs. Biollante was actually the winner of the Toho story competition, with the concept being written by Shinichiro Kobayashi. And as great as Godzilla vs. Biollante is, its box office results weren't. And unfortunately, Toho had to scrap their latter two films, Mothra vs. Bagan and Godzilla vs. Bagan, in favor of rebooting their classic monsters, starting with Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah. In this film, people from the future come to warn Japan about their destruction at the hands of Godzilla. They go back in time to replace the wrong Godzilla by accident, while trying to erase him from history with 3 Dorats who would mutate into King Ghidorah thanks to nuclear testing in the Pacific. So now the world has to deal with both Godzilla and King Ghidorah. The two monsters battle it out. Twice. Unfortunately, this is where you can see how the box office results of Godzilla vs. Biollante affected the film, as there's a big contrast in terms of production design. The effects kinda lost their charm and feel cheaper. As for the story, it's a mess. I don't know what they were trying to do with the whole time travel plot. It definitely raises questions as you watch the other films. And yes, I know there's a Wikizilla video about it, but there are still some things that aren't explained. But I'll give the film this. If it weren't for the great cast of characters, as well as its action sequences, this would have not been a fan favorite. It definitely has some flaws, but it's not a bad film. I can't help but be entertained every time I watch it, especially when it's Godzilla facing his longtime nemesis. Now, the reason why I decided to dedicate a whole video to the Heisei era is because while Return of Godzilla, Godzilla vs. Biollante, and King Ghidorah can easily be ranked as being some of the best the franchise has to offer, the latter films share many problems with one another and feel basic and formulaic in terms of plot, in which they can essentially be boiled down to either, oh no, it's Godzilla and another monster, they must be stopped, or, oh no, a monster, Godzilla must stop him. Starting with Godzilla vs. Mothra, it's essentially a remake of Mothra vs. Godzilla, but with the inclusion of Batra, who's a sort of ancient battle moth that's the opposite of Mothra. Despite being one of the highest grossing and attended Godzilla films ever made, it definitely has problems, such as its uninteresting characters with the exception of Miki, and its heavy reliance on beam spamming. However, I would consider the introduction of Batra as a redeeming quality. I know it's cliche to have an opposite version of an already existing character, but his presence does add to the lore of Mothra's background. Overall, Godzilla vs. Mothra isn't really anything new with the exception of Batra, so you're not really missing anything by not watching it. Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 1993 is, well, better than Godzilla vs. Mothra. It's an interesting role reversal of Godzilla and Mechagodzilla, where Godzilla is the antagonist, as Mechagodzilla is a weapon created by humanity. While there's also the reintroduction of Rodan, completing the Heisei renditions of Toho's Big Five, as well as Godzilla's son, and that's pretty much all I got for it. I mean, the effects look nice for the most part. I really like the first fight between Godzilla and Rodan. It has a good score. It's alright. Nothing too great, it's not the worst thing in the world. I did talk about this film a while back in a collab I did with some fellow YouTubers, but I think my thoughts may have changed since then. Up next is Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla. Though commonly being referred to as the low point of the Heisei series, it does have its fans. Elements such as the island setting and the score does give the movie an aesthetic reminiscent of a Jun Fukuda film. Yeah, Space Godzilla does sound like a lazy concept, but the design does look pretty cool. The film also reintroduces Mothra, who previously made his debut in The Mysterians from 1957. However, it's definitely flawed. The special effects aren't too great, especially when you look at the first fight between Mothra and Space Godzilla, and how there are few instances where the TitanGoji suit is quite literally falling apart. Also, Space Godzilla's origins don't really make sense, and I don't like Godzilla vs. Destroyer. It doesn't have a lot of heart and relies too much on nostalgia from the original Godzilla, and Toho just wanted to get it out of the way in favor of TriStar's American Godzilla film. For more of my thoughts, just check out my review on the film. Overall, the Heisei era of Godzilla films had a very solid start, but Biollante's box office results unfortunately affected the rest of the series. And the drop in quality could also have to do with what happened behind the scenes, such as Koichi Kawakita clashing with directors and his admitted alcoholism, Tomoyuki Tanaka being regulated to just executive producer due to his health, filmmakers not taking these movies seriously, and studio heads at Toho being unpleasant with the box office results of Godzilla films after Godzilla vs. Mothra. But there is a reason why this series of films is so highly regarded. In a time where Godzilla wasn't really popular anymore and was just seen as dumb kid stuff, this series really brought it back to the mainstream with high box office numbers, tons of merchandise, especially with each film being released in December and with film techniques improving over time. They had the advantage of showing Godzilla in a way that wasn't really done before due to small budgets and lack of resources. And I honestly do appreciate the Heisei films for that, and whether or not it holds up compared to the eras before and after is up to you. Yes, I do have my reasons for not enjoying the entirety of the Heisei era, but it definitely has some very strong parts to it. And honestly, we wouldn't be here today without it. That's all I have for today's History of Godzilla. Thank you for watching. Feel free to like, share, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll see you guys later. Wait, so the sea boggin becomes his